He is a champion of leveraging technologies to augment human capability and potential. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome founder and director of Oliver Tian Associates and honorary advisor of APARA, Mr. Oliver Tian.
Hello everyone, good to see you here. It is always a pleasure to be talking at AIBotics and of course listening to the many activities, many comments, many insights that various people talk about. I'm actually very happy to see all of you here today. What's probably more interesting is the fact that the topic that we have generated over this period has always been very interesting, and more importantly, it engages directly with the things that we do and the things that we offer to help transform ourselves into a better society, better quality of life. Now, we heard a very insightful presentation earlier today where Professor Alex Sell, one of my mentors, actually shared with some of the directions in terms of transformation. I'd like to take this moment, this 10-15 minutes or so, to kind of share some additional comments which augments what Professor Alexia has just shared with you. And I chose the topic, disruption of transformation. Right. That's a topic which I thought it would be interesting, and it actually covers a couple of things that we should all look at. AI in transformation is a very interesting discussion. Over the years, we have looked at business transformation, we talk about digital transformation, and now how does it move into a space where AI can play a role in the transformation process? And most importantly, which Professor Xiao alluded to earlier, is the people element, right? The fear of automation and AI, the fear that the people, the workforce will lose a job. How do we manage all this change, and probably look at some of the recent considerations? First of all, let's kind of take a look again in terms of what digital transformation, digital disruption looks into. Professor Xiao alluded to a number of factors, and I kind of use a different verbiage to describe them here, right? Really looking at radical change when we try to transform a process and system, vis-a-vis the need to kind of redefine the value proposition of the business. But having said all this, I want to basically mention that a transformation process don't have to be disruptive. In fact, we can always enjoy the whole process of transformation if we know how to deal with it. And in my session here, I'm going to try to discuss what does that mean. So when we look at the whole transformation process, AI can play a part, actually can help with the digital transformation and make it easy for us to adopt. But that requires a number of consideration and number of factors that we need to think about. First of all, in terms of transformation, right? This is probably generated by a number of factors that has now affected the ecosystem. That includes the freedom of choice and the speed of choice, right? Same time, we look at customers who are starting to mature and be a lot more technology literate and aware. The combination of many of the possibility of how technology can converge together, as well as the fact that organizations can choose different partners or may have already selected partners that they want to work with. All this add together brings about the fact that you want to have quick time to value, to actually support and bring ourselves towards greater customer centricity. In terms of implementing intelligence into an organization, there are probably a few dimensions we can look at. So if I look at a two-dimensional diagram, on the one hand, do we want to involve the human versus no involvement of human in the decision-making loop, the use of hardware and more adaptive systems. So if I explore down this particular position, there are definitely four aspects of intelligence we can build into a transformation process, right? Of course, where there's no human, and if this hardware specific, we look at a whole load of how automation can take place. But if a human gets involved, then we definitely want the AI system to assist the human in performing decision making. And hence we look at assisted intelligence. Moving down to a more adaptive and customized environment, we potentially can look at augmented intelligence, which is probably very powerful today. And more importantly, towards the extreme, the autonomous ability of AI to perform actions without human assistance. And that's what we all aim to go towards. Now, to achieve this, there are probably a number of key factors that we want to consider. Right? First of all, the reason why we want to get towards a more evolved manner of transformation, because of the fact that we want to achieve higher productivity gain. And this could mean the use of robots and autonomous vehicles as an example to automate the entire process. Secondly, the use of technology to augment existing workforce is another important space we want to play in. So assisted and augmented intelligence become very important. And finally, to use it to increase customer demand. So as you can tell, right, besides pure productivity gains, right, we also want to see how our workforce can be augmented and more importantly, drive the need to support greater customer demand, greater customer centricity. Now, of course, all this I've said is nothing new to any one of you. We all can appreciate and align ourselves with that. I want to allude you to a very recent article that was published in Forbes magazine, August 25th, 2021. That's just last week. And this article wrote about the AI revolution that is happening. So I encourage you to kind of look at this article. I think there's a lot of very interesting points that the author has mentioned. Right? They believe moving forward is AI is going to step into every one of our space. But having said that, we got to think very hard. Is this what we want to see happen? We got to think very hard if that happens and we welcome the revolution of AI into our organization. What does that mean? Does it mean that we have to do more than what's needed? How can we ensure that the whole transformation process with AI in discussion is not as disruptive to our business and in fact can assist us to become better? So you got to ask yourself, is your organization ready to harness the potential of AI? Right? Are we ready to consider the need for AI? And Harvard Business Review earlier last year, right, in an article talk about this and actually discuss how that is to be considered within the organization. And in last week's webinar organized by APARA and Constellar, we talk about AI accreditation and readiness. If you recall and you have been in the discussion, we talk about AI unaware to become AI aware, and then you're AI ready, and finally achieve the level of AI competence. Not every one of us are AI competent on the first day, and not all of us are AI unaware. We're probably somewhere in this continuum. What is important is to be able to recognize and understand where you sit in this dimension and how you can start to move the needle. Of course, there are organizations that are AI aware and they do not need to move into AI competence. They probably could use what is available in the marketplace, use available platform, and actually use those platforms to board onto the existing process to support their organization. In that way, and by understanding where you stand in the AI awareness continuum, you will then be able to identify what is needed for your organization. From a transformation basis, I look at it from three possible scales: a beginner skill, an intermediate skill, and an advanced skill. In the beginner and intermediate skill, I think the transformation will be pretty smooth because you probably see less cultural changes, less disruption to your organization, and you build sufficient change aspects in your organization to be ready for the next step. Leadership within the organization needs to look at how we can take this journey without disrupting too much of the existing workflow, and bring the organization to a competency level. Now, this journey, right, could be anywhere between months to years or more, or perhaps never even get to the state of being the expert on using AI in transformation. So if I look at this diagram that's supported and produced in 2018, pre-COVID-19, right, it talks about how digital transformation moving from an analog to a digital environment, and how this digital information can then be used to support business needs, to a space whereby data become a lot more pervasive and available, such that this data can be analyzed to generate sufficient insights to support the business, right? And leadership within the organization can lead the way towards this innovation of a change in culture and essentially bring them to a more successful space. However, having said all that, it is also important to note that it is not just the process and the technology. Right? It is also important to understand how intelligent process will have to interface and integrate into the workplace, the workflow. Right? It must be able to support the workflow and enhance the workflow. Another area to look at is the workplace, the work environment where the technology will be deployed, and how the users of technology can be better reorientated to support the new environment. And lastly, how are we going to upskill the current workforce to support such change in technology? Those are important questions that we ask ourselves. And if we deal with each of these 3 points very clearly and in a very roadmap direction, then the disruption can be minimized. So what does that mean? So in that regard, I propose to all of you an adopt approach, right? We need to be able to adopt how the world is changing, how your business is changing, how the world of work is evolving over time with all the technology coming into your space. The first step that any organization that you have to take is to assess the current landscape, the current use cases, how other organizations are looking at the transformation process, how they are considering the AI technology, and to evaluate the maturity and the availability of such technology to support your organization. Secondly, drafting out the transformation process. The map to transformation is very key. We need to decide the different stages of how the transformation is going to go through, and how AI at each stage can support your organization. Then comes the real action, operationalizing the change, right? Taking the technology, making it work, integrating it with the workflow, working together with the people in your organization, and enabling the culture. What is important is the next step, planning to scale up upon the dynamics. As you introduce technology into your organization, there is going to be a need to upskill your workforce. And to scale up doesn't mean sending the employees to a 5-day workshop and expect them to become experts. There is probably a need to look at new ways of educating the workforce, a new way of enterprise and corporate learning that can help the skills to be enabled upon a need. The moment of need in terms of a skill becomes a lot more important than learning skills that may not be adopted and used accordingly. Finally, as you transcend between the stages of success, it is important to celebrate. It is important to know that you're bringing your company, your organization from one stage to another, and to see that through and bring a higher degree of maturity into your organization, both from a technology and operational standpoint. Now, what is key in the whole process of change management is the aspect of behavioral change. Now, this is one discussion that can take a longer time. Unlike the traditional IT systems where we put in place, where it involves purely a procedural change, where there's an introduction of a new process. With the introduction of AI into transformation, human behavior needs to be adapted. And this is where uh, it involves not just technology, but the organizational readiness, the buy-in of the decision makers, the communication and training process, and how can we then institutionalize the new status quo. Yes, the new status quo. The new normal is something which the organization needs to accept. The people, the workforce in the organization will need to accept. And by accepting the new status quo, behaviors will need to change. The question is, how do I manage all this? Now, this is a very nice diagram that I love to share, right? How can we take change from the need to drive the adoption all the way to the recognition and eventually the measurement of success, right? Each step is meaningful. Each step helps with the easing and the ability to enjoy the transformation process. And each step actually can be self-contained yet integrated into the first and the subsequent steps in order to ensure that the change is managed effectively. I just want to give you another example. This example talks about how the supply chain has been disrupted. And a quote, a disruption like the pandemic is no longer rare and unpredictable. Right? The high threat of any natural disasters, political unrest, economic crisis, and so on and so forth, right, must enable companies, must lead to companies building capabilities that can mitigate such disruptions, right? So some of the disruptions may not be generated out of the digital transformation process. It could well be an external factor. The question is between technological disruption and digital transformation and innovation that you want to bring your company to. Do you have a choice? In this instance, COVID-19 has happened to us in the last 18 months, right? And that's put us in a position where you really will need to be able to accept the change and know that businesses and industries can be disrupted accordingly. So moving from a current state to a future state, there are many things that you need to deal with. And what's important is to look at how and the need to identify a change manager within your organization or externally hired to help with the transition for people, for technology, for process, and for the organization in the transformation journey. And the profile of this change manager needs to be, number one, knowledgeable about the journey of transformation, the capability, the need for this change manager to communicate effectively with the right messages to ensure that people can accept the change, and who is sufficiently empowered to influence the change, keeping an open mind and being empathetic about the change, and most importantly, to be creative about how we can institutionalize the change. I guess this brings us to the discussion around a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And here I relate to potentially students' view on things, right? Why is it that some students can do well and some students do not do well? And I relate it to the workforce, how certain workforce can be more adaptive to change and certain do not adapt very well to change. Right? I won't go into that detail, but what I want to share in between is that there is this factor around benefit mindset. Growth mindset suggests that we continue to evolve, continue to change, and strive for the excellence position. Fixed mindset refers to those who do not want to move because they're very comfortable where they are. The questions organizations need to ask themselves is, where do we stand, and what is the benefit you want to get out of this transformation process? So going back to the earlier part where we discussed, right, the AI indicators, right, whether you're unaware of AI, AI aware, AI ready or AI competent. Not all companies need to be able to achieve the level of AI competence. You do not need to be in the excellent position. Leaders in organization need to understand and needs to build the culture to explore what is beneficial to the organization and need to believe in that strength and eventually help the workforce to contribute meaningfully to that benefit for the people in the organization as well as for the organization at the same time. In the whole process of adapting to new models in the learning mindset, it is important that leaders help to ensure that it is safe to learn. Now, the reason why people do not change, the reason why the workforce are concerned about transitioning to a new environment is because they are uncertain. It's because they fear the unknown. It is because they do not want to fail, right? And it is important organization leadership help to make it safe to learn. Now, to make it safe, then what does it mean? We must recognize that in the journey there will possibly be failures, and hence it is important to reframe failures as a learning lesson, reframe failures as a need to explore and understand what are the areas that's not covered. And in that process, you help your organization to grow, you adapt the technology to fit into the organization needs and to develop it and progress the transformation accordingly. The second important advice is we need to encourage a team voice. The workers and the managers needs to come together to look at how to transform together. A top-down process may not necessarily work, but a creative process where everybody come together to support the transformation is extremely important. The third and probably most important is the fact that we need to be able to appreciate each other, right? Appreciate one another and be able to encourage and support one another to continue with the transformation process. Do not leave anyone behind in the transformation process. Right? If we can do that, then the fear of transition, the fear and concern around how we can move forward can be quickly allayed. And more importantly, the management, the workforce, as well as the organization can move forward very well. We always talk about technology and we need to exploit technology. But if we turn it the other way around, can we talk about how we can explore the use of technology and how we can use technology to augment our capability? And that brings us to the discussion where we need to look beyond just simply exploiting technology, but look at how best we can explore the use of technology to support our organizational needs. So, having gone through all that discussion, right, I put to you a equation. Change management plus the proper management of change puts us into a continuing process of managing change. Process together with the right leadership bring us a successful transformation journey. And we can always uncomplicate the whole transformation journey and allow the entire organization to enjoy the transformation process. What we have for the rest of the sessions in today's webinar is 4 very, very insightful presentations by carefully selected speakers. The session after my comments will include a speaker who will share with you some of the often overlooked pitfalls in the transformation process, and there's a lot of lessons we can learn there. The second is look at how in the transformation or learning is starting to happen within an organization. What are the different ways learning within an organization could help in the transformation process of the organization. We talk about customer centricity. We then will have a dual presentation around the need for customer experience and the need to enhance customer experience. And last but not least, a topic around democratizing AI. AI is a huge monster that sometimes we wonder what it takes to implement AI. We believe there is a way we can bring that down to a bite-sized easy for organizations, small and medium enterprise to bite and chew. And you'll hear from a speaker who talk about democratizing AI with no code. We'll listen to that shortly. And like what the host, Ms. El Kwan, have shared earlier, we will also be announcing an MOU signing between APARA and our partner to look at how this can effectively help our members and the audience who are interested in the process to go through a journey where learning about AI, building an AI solution is not a complicated process. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation here, and I welcome any questions that you have. If you put in your question into the chat, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, we will have time later on in the panel discussion to review your questions and address the concerns that you have or clarify any questions that you have. Thank you very much, everyone.